Welcome, dreamer. Before we begin tonight's gentle journey into rest, I want to take just a moment to thank you for being here. If you enjoy these calming sleep stories and they help bring peace to your nights, please consider supporting the channel by liking this video, subscribing, or sharing it with someone you care about. Your support helps keep this cozy space glowing for all who need it. Now, let's settle in. Take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. Let the day begin to melt away. You're safe here. You're held. And you don't have to do anything except relax. Tonight, we'll drift into a world where starlight dances across a quiet lake, where the air is cool and clean, and the only sound is the soft ripple of water beneath your boat. With every breath, we'll go deeper into stillness, gently floating, gently dreaming. Let's begin tonight's bedtime stories. A mandarin once lived in Qiangho who was so exceedingly cross and disagreeable that everyone hated him. He snarled and stormed at every person he met and was never known to laugh or be merry under any circumstances. Especially he hated boys and girls, for the boys jeered at him, which aroused his wrath, and the girls made fun of him, which hurt his pride. When he had become so unpopular that no one would speak to him, the emperor heard about it and commanded him to emigrate to America. This suited the Mandarin very well, but before he left China, he stole the great book of magic that belonged to the wise magician Hao-Tsai. Then, gathering up his little store of money, he took ship for America. He settled in a city of the Middle West and of course started a laundry, since that seems to be the natural vocation of every Chinaman, be he coolie or Mandarin. He made no acquaintances with the other Chinamen of the town, who, when they met him and saw the red button in his hat, knew him for a real Mandarin and bowed low before him. He put up a red and white sign, and people brought their laundry to him and got paper checks with Chinese characters upon them in exchange, this being the only sort of character the Mandarin had left. One day, as the ugly one was ironing in his shop in the basement of 263.5 Main Street, he looked up and saw a crowd of childish faces pressed against the window. Most Chinamen make friends with children. This one hated them and tried to drive them away. But as soon as he returned to his work, they were back at the window again, mischievously smiling down upon him. The naughty Mandarin uttered horrid words in the Manchu language and made fierce gestures, but this did no good at all. The children stayed as long as they pleased, and they came again the very next day as soon as school was over, and likewise the next day and the next, for they saw their presence at the window bothered the Chinamen, and were delighted accordingly. The following day being Sunday, the children did not appear, But as the mandarin, being a heathen, worked in his little shop, a big butterfly flew in at the open door and fluttered about the room. The mandarin closed the door and chased the butterfly until he caught it, when he pinned it against the wall by sticking 2 pins through its beautiful wings. This did not hurt the butterfly, there being no feeling in its wings, but it made him a safe prisoner. This butterfly was of large size, and its wings were exquisitely marked by gorgeous colors laid out in regular designs like the stained glass windows of a cathedral. The mandarin now opened his wooden chest and drew forth the great book of magic he had stolen from Houtsai. Turning the pages slowly, he came to a passage describing how to understand the language of butterflies. This he read carefully, and then mixed a magic formula in a tin cup and drank it down with a wry face. Immediately thereafter he spoke to the butterfly in its own language, saying, "Why did you enter this room?" "I smelled beeswax," answered the butterfly. "Therefore I thought I might find honey here." "But you are my prisoner," said the mandarin. "If I please, I can kill you, or leave you on the wall to starve to death." "I expect that," replied the butterfly with a sigh. "But my race is short-lived anyway. It doesn't matter whether death comes sooner or later. Yet you like to live, do you not?" asked the mandarin. "Yet life is pleasant and the world is beautiful. I do not seek death." "Then," said the mandarin, "I will give you life, a long and pleasant life, if you will promise to obey me for a time and carry out my instructions." "How can a butterfly serve a man?" asked the creature in surprise. "Usually they cannot," was the reply. "But I have a book of magic which teaches me strange things. Do you promise?" "Oh, yes, I promise," answered the butterfly, "for even as your slave I will get some enjoyment out of life, while should you kill me, that is the end of everything." "Truly," said the mandarin, "butterflies have no souls, and therefore cannot live again." "But I have enjoyed 3 lives already," returned the butterfly with some pride. "I have been a caterpillar and a chrysalis before I became a butterfly. You were never anything but a Chinaman, although I admit your life is longer than mine." "I will extend your life for many days if you will obey me," declared the Chinaman. "I can easily do so by means of my magic." "Of course I will obey you," said the butterfly carelessly. "Then listen, you know children, do you not? Boys and girls?" "Yes, I know them. They chase me and try to catch me as you have done," replied the butterfly. "And they mock me and jeer at me through the window," continued the mandarin bitterly. "Therefore they are your enemies and mine. But with your aid and the help of the magic book we shall have a fine revenge for their insults." "I don't care much for revenge," said the butterfly. "They are but children, and 'tis natural they should wish to catch such a beautiful creature as I am. Nevertheless, I care, and you must obey me," retorted the mandarin harshly. "I, at least, will have my revenge." Then he stuck a drop of molasses upon the wall beside the butterfly's head and said, "Eat that, while I read my book and prepare my magic formula." So the butterfly feasted upon the molasses, and the mandarin studied his book, after which he began to mix a magic compound in the tin cup. When the mixture was ready, he released the butterfly from the wall and said to it, "I command you to dip your 2 front feet into this magic compound, and then fly away until you meet a child. Fly close, whether it be a boy or a girl, and touch the child upon its forehead with your feet. Whosoever is thus touched, the book declares, will at once become a pig, and will remain such forever after. Then return to me and dip your legs afresh in the contents of this cup. So shall all my enemies, the children, become miserable swine, while no one will think of accusing me of the sorcery." "Very well. Since such is your command, I obey," said the butterfly. Then it dipped its front legs, which were the shortest of the 6, into the contents of the tin cup, and flew out of the door and away over the houses to the edge of the town. There it alighted in a flower garden, and soon forgot all about its mission to turn children into swine. In going from flower to flower, it soon brushed the magic compound from its legs, so that when the sun began to set and the butterfly finally remembered its master, the mandarin, it could not have injured a child had it tried, but it did not intend to try. That horrid old Chinaman, it thought, hates children and wishes to destroy them. But I rather like children myself, and shall not harm them. Of course I must return to my master, for he is a magician, and would seek me out and kill me. But I can deceive him about this matter easily enough." When the butterfly flew in at the door of the mandarin's laundry, he asked eagerly, "Well, did you meet a child?" "I did," replied the butterfly calmly. "It was a pretty golden-haired girl, but now 'tis a grunting pig." "Good, good, good," cried the mandarin, dancing joyfully about the room. "You shall have molasses for your supper, and tomorrow you must change 2 children into pigs." The butterfly did not reply, but ate the molasses in silence. Having no soul, it had no conscience, and having no conscience, it was able to lie to the mandarin with great readiness and a certain amount of enjoyment. Next morning, by the mandarin's command, the butterfly dipped its legs in the mixture and flew away in search of children. When it came to the edge of the town, it noticed a pig in a sty, and alighting upon the rail of the sty, it looked down at the creature and thought, "If I could change a child into a pig by touching it with the magic compound, what could I change a pig into, I wonder?" Being curious to determine this fine point in sorcery, the butterfly fluttered down and touched its front feet to the pig's nose. Instantly the animal disappeared, and in its place was a shock-headed, dirty-looking boy, which sprang from the sty and ran down the road uttering loud whoops. "That's funny," said the butterfly to itself. "The mandarin would be very angry with me if he knew of this, for I have liberated one more of the creatures that bother him." It fluttered along after the boy, who had paused to throw stones at a cat. But Pussy escaped by running up a tree, where thick branches protected her from the stones. Then the boy discovered a newly planted garden, and trampled upon the beds until the seeds were scattered far and wide and the garden was ruined. Next he caught up a switch and struck with it a young calf that stood quietly grazing in a field. The poor creature ran away with piteous bleats, and the boy laughed and followed after it, striking the frightened animal again and again. Really, thought the butterfly, I do not wonder the mandarin hates children if they are all so cruel and wicked as this one. The calf having escaped him, the boy came back to the road where he met two little girls on their way to school. One of them had a red apple in her hand, and the boy snatched it away and began eating it. The little girl commenced to cry, but her companion, more brave and sturdy, cried out, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, you nasty boy." At this, the boy reached out and slapped her pretty face, whereupon she also began to sob. Although possessed of neither soul nor conscience, the butterfly had a very tender heart, and now decided it could endure this boy no longer. If I permitted him to exist, it reflected, I should never forgive myself, for the monster would do nothing but evil from morning till night. So it flew directly into his face and touched his forehead with its sticky front feet. The next instant the boy had disappeared, but a grunting pig ran swiftly up the road in the direction of its sty. The butterfly gave a sigh of relief. This time I have indeed used the mandarin's magic upon a child, it whispered, as it floated lazily upon the light breeze. But since the child was originally a pig, I do not think I have any cause to reproach myself. The little girls were sweet and gentle, and I would not injure them to save my life. But were all boys like this transformed pig, I should not hesitate to carry out the mandarin's orders. Then it flew into a rose bush, where it remained comfortably until evening. At sundown it returned to its master. "Have you changed two of them into pigs?" he asked at once. "I have," replied the butterfly. "One was a pretty black-eyed baby, and the other a freckle-faced, red-haired, barefooted new boy." "Good, good, good," screamed the mandarin, in an ecstasy of delight. "Those are the ones who torment me the most. Change every new boy you meet into a pig." "Very well," answered the butterfly quietly, and ate its supper of molasses. Several days were passed by the butterfly in the same manner. It fluttered aimlessly about the flower gardens while the sun shone, and returned at night to the mandarin with false tales of turning children into swine. Sometimes it would be one child which was transformed, sometimes two, and occasionally three. But the mandarin always greeted the butterfly's report with intense delight and gave him molasses for supper. One evening, however, the butterfly thought it might be well to vary the report, so that the mandarin might not grow suspicious, and when its master asked what child had been changed into a pig that day, the lying creature answered. It was a Chinese boy, and when I touched him he became a black pig. This angered the mandarin, who was in an especially cross mood. He spitefully snapped the butterfly with his finger and nearly broke its beautiful wing, for he forgot that Chinese boys had once mocked him and only remembered his hatred for American boys. The butterfly became very indignant at this abuse from the mandarin. It refused to eat its molasses and sulked all the evening, for it had grown to hate the mandarin almost as much as the mandarin hated children. When morning came, it was still trembling with indignation, but the mandarin cried out, "Make haste, miserable slave, for today you must change 4 children into pigs to make up for yesterday." The butterfly did not reply. His little black eyes were sparkling wickedly, and no sooner had he dipped his feet into the magic compound than he flew full in the mandarin's face and touched him upon his ugly, flat forehead. Soon after, a gentleman came into the room for his laundry. The mandarin was not there, but running around the place was a repulsive, scrawny pig, which squealed most miserably. The butterfly flew away to a brook and washed from its feet all traces of the magic compound. When night came, it slept in a rose bush. In all fairyland, there is no more mischievous a person than Tanko-Mankie the yellow ryle. He flew through the city one afternoon, quite invisible to mortal eyes, but seeing everything himself, and noticed a figure of a wax lady standing behind the big plate glass window of Mr. Floman's department store. The wax lady was beautifully dressed, and extended in her stiff left hand was a card bearing the words, "Rare bargain, this stylish costume imported from Paris. Former price, $20, reduced to only $19.98. This impressive announcement had drawn before the window a crowd of women shoppers, who stood looking at the wax lady with critical eyes. Tanko-Mankie laughed to himself, the low, gurgling little laugh that always means mischief. Then he flew close to the wax figure and breathed twice upon its forehead. From that instant the dummy began to live, but so dazed and astonished was she at the unexpected sensation that she continued to stand stupidly staring at the women outside and holding out the placard as before. The ryle laughed again and flew away. Anyone but Tanko-Mankie would have remained to help the wax lady out of the troubles that were sure to overtake her. But this naughty elf thought it rare fun to turn the inexperienced lady loose in a cold and heartless world, and leave her to shift for herself. Fortunately, it was almost 6 o'clock when the dummy first realized that she was alive. And before she had collected her new thoughts and decided what to do, a man came around and drew down all the window shades, shutting off the view from the curious shoppers. Then the clerks and cashiers and floor walkers and cash girls went home, and the store was closed for the night, although the sweepers and scrubbers remained to clean the floors for the following day. The window inhabited by the wax lady was boxed in, like a little room, one small door being left at the side for the window trimmer to creep in and out of. So the scrubbers never noticed that the dummy, when left to herself, dropped the placard to the floor and sat down upon a pile of silks to wonder who she was, where she was, and how she happened to be alive. For you must consider, dear reader, that in spite of her size and her rich costume, in spite of her pink cheeks and fluffy yellow hair, this lady was very young. No older in reality than a baby born but half an hour. All she knew of the world was contained in the glimpse she had secured of the busy street facing her window. All she knew of people lay in the actions of the group of women which had stood before her on the other side of the window pane and criticized the fit of her dress, or remarked upon its stylish appearance. So she had little enough to think about, and her thoughts moved somewhat slowly. Yet one thing she really decided upon, and that was not to remain in the window and be insolently stared at by a lot of women who were not nearly so handsome or well-dressed as herself. By the time she reached this important conclusion, it was after midnight, but dim lights were burning in the big deserted store. So she crept through the door of her window and walked down the long aisles, pausing now and then to look with much curiosity at the wealth of finery confronting her on every side. When she came to the glass cases filled with trimmed hats, she remembered having seen upon the heads of the women in the street similar creations. So she selected one that suited her fancy and placed it carefully upon her yellow locks. I won't attempt to explain what instinct it was that made her glance into a nearby mirror to see if the hat was straight, but this she certainly did. It didn't correspond with her dress very well, but the poor thing was too young to have much taste in matching colors. When she reached the glove counter, she remembered that gloves were also worn by the women she had seen. She took a pair from the case and tried to fit them upon her stiff, wax-coated fingers. But the gloves were too small and ripped in the seams. Then she tried another pair and several others as well. But hours passed before she finally succeeded in getting her hands covered with a pair of pea-green kids. Next, she selected a parasol from a large and varied assortment in the rear of the store. Not that she had any idea what it was used for, but other ladies carried such things, so she also would have one. When she again examined herself critically in the mirror, she decided her outfit was now complete, and to her inexperienced eyes there was no perceptible difference between her and the women who had stood outside the window. Whereupon she tried to leave the store, but found every door fast locked. The wax lady was in no hurry. She inherited patience from her previous existence. Just to be alive and to wear beautiful clothes was sufficient enjoyment for her at present. So she sat down upon a stool and waited quietly until daylight. When the janitor unlocked the door in the morning, the wax lady swept past him and walked with stiff but stately strides down the street. The poor fellow was so completely whuckered at seeing the well-known wax lady leave her window and march away from the store that he fell over in a heap and only saved himself from fainting by striking his funny bone against the doorstep. When he recovered his wits, she had turned the corner and disappeared. The wax lady's immature mind had reasoned that, since she had come to life, her evident duty was to mix with the world and do whatever other folks did. She could not realize how different she was from people of flesh and blood, nor did she know she was the first dummy that had ever lived, or that she owed her unique experience to Tanko-Mankey's love of mischief. So ignorance gave her a confidence in herself that she was not justly entitled to. It was yet early in the day, and the few people she met were hurrying along the streets. Many of them turned into restaurants and eating houses, and following their example, the wax lady also entered one and sat upon a stool before a lunch counter. "Coffee and rolls," said a shop girl on the next stool. "Coffee and rolls," repeated the dummy, and soon the waiter placed them before her. Of course she had no appetite, as her constitution, being mostly wood, did not require food, but she watched the shop girl and saw her put the coffee to her mouth and drink it. Therefore the wax lady did the same, and the next instant was surprised to feel the hot liquid trickling out between her wooden ribs. The coffee also blistered her wax lips, and so disagreeable was the experience that she arose and left the restaurant, paying no attention to the demands of the waiter for 20 cents, mum. Not that she intended to defraud him, but the poor creature had no idea what he meant by 20 cents, mum. As she came out, she met the window trimmer at Floman's store. The man was rather nearsighted, but seeing something familiar in the lady's features, he politely raised his hat. The wax lady also raised her hat, thinking it the proper thing to do, and the man hurried away with a horrified face. Then a woman touched her arm and said, "Beg pardon, ma'am, but there's a price mark hanging on your dress behind." "Yes, I know," replied the wax lady stiffly. "It was originally $20, but it's been reduced to $19.98. The woman looked surprised at such indifference and walked on. Some carriages were standing at the edge of the sidewalk, and seeing the dummy hesitate, a driver approached her and touched his cap. "Cab, ma'am?" he asked. "No," said she, misunderstanding him. "I'm wax." "Oh!" he exclaimed, and looked after her wonderingly. "Here's your morning paper," yelled a newsboy. "Mine, did you say?" she asked. "Sure. Chronicle, Enquirer, Republican Spatch. What'll you have?" "What are they for?" inquired the wax lady simply. "Why, to read, o' course. All the news, you know." She shook her head and glanced at a paper. "It looks all speckled and mixed up," she said. "I'm afraid I can't read." "Ever been to school?" asked the boy, becoming interested. "No. What's school?" she inquired. The boy gave her an indignant look. "Say," he cried, "you're just a dummy, that's what ye are," and ran away to seek a more promising customer. "I wonder that he means," thought the poor lady. "Am I really different in some way from all the others? I look like them certainly, and I try to act like them. Yet that boy called me a dummy and seemed to think I acted queerly." This idea worried her a little, but she walked on to the corner where she noticed a streetcar stop to let some people on. The wax lady, still determined to do as others did, also boarded the car and sat down quietly in a corner. After riding a few blocks, the conductor approached her and said, "Fare, please." "What's that?" she inquired innocently. "Your fare," said the man impatiently. She stared at him stupidly, trying to think what he meant. "Come, come," growled the conductor. "Either pay up or get off." Still she did not understand, and he grabbed her rudely by the arm and lifted her to her feet. But when his hand came in contact with the hard wood of which her arm was made, the fellow was filled with surprise. He stooped down and peered into her face, and, seeing it was wax instead of flesh, he gave a yell of fear and jumped from the car, running as if he had seen a ghost. At this, the other passengers also yelled and sprang from the car, fearing a collision, and the motorman, knowing something was wrong, followed suit. The wax lady, seeing the others run, jumped from the car last of all, and stepped in front of another car coming at full speed from the opposite direction. She heard cries of fear and of warning on all sides, but before she understood her danger, she was knocked down and dragged for half a block. When the car was brought to a stop, a policeman reached down and pulled her from under the wheels. Her dress was badly torn and soiled. Her left ear was entirely gone, and the left side of her head was caved in. But she quickly scrambled to her feet and asked for her hat. This a gentleman had already picked up, and when the policeman handed it to her and noticed the great hole in her head and the hollow place it disclosed, the poor fellow trembled so frightfully that his knees actually knocked together. Why, ma'am, you're killed," he gasped. "What does it mean to be killed?" asked the wax lady. The policeman shuddered and wiped the perspiration from his forehead. "You're it," he answered with a groan. The crowd that had collected were looking upon the lady wonderingly, and a middle-aged gentleman now exclaimed, "Why, she's wax." "Wax?" echoed the policeman. "Certainly, she's one of those dummies they put in the windows," declared the middle-aged man. The people who had collected shouted, "You're right. That's what she is. She's a dummy." "Are you?" inquired the policeman sternly. The wax lady did not reply. She began to fear she was getting into trouble, and the staring crowd seemed to embarrass her. Suddenly a bootblack attempted to solve the problem by saying, "You guys is all wrong. Can a dummy talk? Can a dummy walk? Can a dummy live?" "Hush," murmured the policeman. "Look here." and he pointed to the hole in the lady's head. The newsboy looked, turned pale, and whistled to keep himself from shivering. A second policeman now arrived, and after a brief conference it was decided to take the strange creature to headquarters. So they called a hurry-up wagon, and the damaged wax lady was helped inside and driven to the police station. There the policeman locked her in a cell and hastened to tell Inspector Mugg their wonderful story. Inspector Mugg had just eaten a poor breakfast and was not in a pleasant mood. So he roared and stormed at the unlucky policemen, saying they were themselves dummies to bring such a fairy tale to a man of sense. He also hinted that they had been guilty of intemperance. The policeman tried to explain, but Inspector Mugg would not listen, and while they were still disputing in rushed Mr. Floman, the owner of the department store. "I want a dozen detectives at once, Inspector," he cried. "What for?" demanded Mugg. "One of the wax ladies has escaped from my store and eloped with a $19.98 costume, a $4.23 hat, a $2.19 parasol, and a 76-cent pair of gloves, and I want her arrested." While he paused for breath, the inspector glared at him in amazement. "Is everybody going crazy at the same time?" he inquired sarcastically. "How could a wax dummy run away?" "I don't know, but she did. When my janitor opened the door this morning, he saw her run out." "Why didn't he stop her?" asked Mugg. "He was too frightened. But she's stolen my property, Your Honor, and I want her arrested," declared the storekeeper. The inspector thought for a moment. "You wouldn't be able to prosecute her," he said, "for there's no law against dummies stealing." Mr. Floman sighed bitterly. "Am I to lose that $19.98 costume and the $4.25 hat and—" "By no means," interrupted Inspector Mugg. "The police of this city are ever prompt to act in defense of our worthy citizens. We have already arrested the wax lady, and she is locked up in cell number 16. You may go there and recover your property if you wish, but before you prosecute her for stealing, you'd better hunt up a law that applies to dummies." "All I want," said Mr. Floman, "is that $19.98 costume and—" "Come along," interrupted the policeman. "I'll take you to the cell." But when they entered number 16, they found only a lifeless dummy lying prone upon the floor. Its wax was cracked and blistered, its head was badly damaged, and the bargain costume was dusty, soiled, and much bedraggled. For the mischief-loving Tanko-Mankie had flown by and breathed once more upon the poor wax lady, and in that instant her brief life ended. "It's just as I thought," said Inspector Mugg, leaning back in his chair contentedly. "I knew all the time the thing was a fake. It seems sometimes as though the whole world would go crazy if there wasn't some level-headed man around to bring 'em to their senses. Dummies are wood and wax, and that's all there is of 'em." "That may be the rule," whispered the policeman to himself, "but this one were a dummy as lived." John Cooper was a little boy whose father and mother lived in a cottage on one side of a village green. He was his parents' only child, so that he had no brothers nor sisters to play with. But he had a dog of which he was very fond, and he used sometimes to play with other children on the green. Tom Jones was one of the boys that played with John Cooper. One day he asked John Cooper to go for a long walk with him instead of going to school. John at first would not consent, but at last he gave way and went with Tom, taking Carlo with him. There was a pretty stream of water that ran along one side of the green, and then passed through a wood in a winding course. In some places it was rather broad and deep, and in other places it was shallow, and ran murmuring over the stones at the bottom. Tom said that it would be very pleasant to go along the stream, sometimes on one side, and sometimes on the other, far into the wood, and to look for birds' nests. The sun was shining very brightly, the trees were in full leaf, the grass was thick and green, sweet flowers were blooming on all sides, butterflies and dragonflies sported in the sunshine, and birds were singing on every bush and tree. All things seemed to be joyful, and the two boys started off briskly, with Carlo after them. But of this party, the only one that was truly happy was Carlo. He had nothing to do but to obey his master, and this he had done when John had called him away from his home. John tried to raise his own spirits, and ran and jumped about and romped with Carlo. But he could not forget that he had done wrong, that he ought to have been at school, and that he should grieve his kind parents when they knew what he was now doing. The thought of this would come into his mind, and kept him from being happy. As for Tom Jones, he seemed merry enough, though he not only knew that he was doing wrong himself, but that he had led John into mischief. He tried to forget this, and laughed and shouted with all his might. But it was in vain, and he had bitter feelings at the bottom of his heart all the time. They went on rambling till they had got more than a mile into the wood. The stream here was wide and deep. On one side of it there grew an old willow, and in one of the branches of this they saw a wren's nest. As Tom was the stronger boy of the two, it was agreed that he should help John up to the branch, so that he might reach the nest. John got upon the branch, and he had put out his hand to take hold of the nest, when the branch broke off, and down he fell into the water. Tom laughed at this, for he knew that the stream was not deep enough to drown him, but Carlo rushed in and dragged his master by the clothes towards the bank. John scrambled out, but he was covered with mud. Tom helped him to take off his clothes and clean off the mud and dry them, but with all they could do, John was still in a sad mess. And as it was now late in the day, he turned to go home with a heavy heart. When he reached the cottage, he found his father and mother in great alarm, as they could not think what had become of him. When they found out what had taken place, their alarm was changed into grief, on account of the son whom they loved so much, having done wrong. John himself cried a great deal, and said that he was more vexed because he had caused them grief than he should have been if they had scolded and whipped him. His mother told him that she left it to his own heart to scold him, and that he should go to his bedroom and pray to God on his knees to forgive him, as she had taught him to pray. John did as she bade him, and he prayed to God with all his heart. He then went to sleep with a quiet mind, and when he awoke the next morning, he prayed again that God would give him strength to do his duty, and to stand firm when he should be tempted again, as he had been by Tom Jones. He then read a chapter in the Bible to his mother, and went to school. His master kept him in, and gave him only a piece of bread and a cup of water for dinner. But he did not suffer nearly so much from this as he had done from having grieved his dear parents. For he had before this been brought to repent, and he felt that God and his father and mother had forgiven him. John Cooper never again grieved his father and mother by doing wrong, and never forgot the lesson he had learned when Tom Jones led him astray as long as he lived. When John Cooper became a man, there were bad times, and he could not get a living at the trade to which he had been brought up. So he went for a horse soldier, and before he went, his father and mother gave him their blessing, and he prayed with all his heart that God would bless the old people and preserve them, and said he would let them have as much of his pay as ever he could. It was a sad day for him and his parents when he went away. They had never been parted for so long a time before, and he was now going to India, from whence he could not return for some years. But they could not help it. So they all said that it was God's will that they should part, and it was their duty to bear it as well as they could. After John was gone, the old people never missed a day, but they prayed to God to keep their son, both in his soul and body, from all evil. They were very poor, and were now too old to work much. But with what they got of John's pay, they had enough just to live upon, and above all they had thankful hearts, which made them happy. Yet they often wished for John's return. Sometimes, too, they were fearful lest he should be killed or wounded in the wars. But when they felt thus, they always tried to put their trust in God. When John had been away 10 years, he came back one day, safe and sound, as his father and mother were standing at the door of the cottage. You may judge how they all felt, and how many questions his fond mother asked him as to where he had been and how he had got on. The next day was Sunday, and both John and his parents were glad of it, for they wished to go to church to offer up their thanks to God, who had kept John safe through many dangers, had saved the lives of the old people, and had now brought them to each other again. It was a fine, bright morning in spring, just such a one as it had been nearly 20 years before, when Tom Jones had tempted John Cooper to keep away from school and to go into the wood to take birds' nests. John did not forget that day. and when it came into his mind he could not help thinking of the changes that had taken place since. He went to church, and you may be sure that he and the old man and woman gave thanks to God with all their hearts for the mercy he had shown to them. Mary Jones was a poor woman whose husband had gone to sea on a long voyage. She lived in a house by the roadside and got her living by washing. She had 2 little boys who were her great comfort and whom she used to call Ned and Tom. For some time after her husband had left, she got on very well and was able to send the boys to school, but she caught a fever and was forced to keep her bed. Her neighbor, Sarah Smith, was very kind to her and used to come to the house every morning and evening to do what she could to help her. But she was a poor woman and could not afford to give Mary Jones anything that cost money, so poor Mary was forced to part with a great many things that she might get food. Ned and Tom at this time took turns to go to school. Tom used to go to school one day, while Ned waited on his mother, and the next day Ned went to school and Tom stayed at home. One morning when Ned was going to school, the thought of his poor mother pressed hard on his heart, and after he had gone a little way, he burst out crying. He had not gone far along the narrow lane towards the school when 2 young ladies met him and asked him why he was crying. He told them that he was thinking of his poor, sick mother. The ladies then asked him his name and where he lived, and said they would go and call upon his mother. He thanked them and dried up his tears, and went on to school with a much lighter heart. Soon after he reached home in the evening, the 2 kind ladies came to his mother's house with a footboy, who brought a basket filled with bread and meat, and some things fit for the poor sick woman. They told Mary Jones how they had met Ned in the lane, and what he had told them, and she thanked them for what they had brought, and said that she hoped God would bless them for their goodness to her. They then asked about Ned and Tom, and said they would get their father to do what he could for them. The young ladies then went home, told their father and mother what they had seen and heard, and thanked God that they had been able to make a poor woman and her 2 sons happy. There was a poor woman named Rachel Jenkins, who lived in a very little cottage at some distance from any other house. She was a widow and very poor, but she was very clean and careful, so that her cottage had always a look of neatness and comfort. She used to spend most of her time in spinning. She had 1 son, whose name was Harry. He was 12 years old, and used to carry a basket filled with tapes and thread, pins and needles, and other things of that sort, which he sold to people who lived near. He used to go out in the morning and return in the evening, and you may be sure his mother was always glad when the time came for him to come home. One evening, as he was on his way home, about half a mile from his mother's house, he saw an old man sitting by the wayside, who was very tired and seemed as if he was not able to walk any further. His hair was quite white, and his face and hands were thin and wrinkled. Harry said to him in a kind voice, "You seem tired, Father. Have you got much further to walk?" The old man told him that he had to go to the next town, which was 12 miles further, but that he was so tired he was sure that he should not be able to get there that night. On this, Harry said, "I wish you would go home with me, for I am sure my mother would be very glad that you should sleep in our house." The old man thanked him and said he would go with him. So he rested his hand upon Harry's shoulder and walked slowly towards the house. Harry's mother met them at the door, and when Harry had told her how he had met with the old man, she said she was glad to see him and asked him to walk in to take some tea. After tea, the old man told Sarah Jenkins that he was going to see his son, who was laid up in a hospital in the town to which he was going. His son was a soldier, and had been in the West Indies for some years, but he caught the yellow fever and was sent home sick. The next morning the old man went on his way and blessed Sarah Jenkins and Harry, because they had done good to him who could make no other return than to thank them and pray for them. When I was a girl, Sunday evening used to be the part of the week that I loved best, and I liked it better in winter than in summer. We used to sit round a blazing fire. My mother used then to teach my little brother Tom to say his prayers, and my father used to teach me to read in Pilgrim's Progress or some such book, while my brother John sat near reading some book or other that was fit for a Sunday with his dog Hector lying at his feet. My dear old grandfather was then alive, and he would sit at the table with the large old family Bible before him for the whole evening. As I look back upon the pleasant picture in my mind, my eye fills with tears. I cannot help thinking of what has become of the faces that were then so full of smiles and gladness. My grandfather went to the grave first, but he died in a good old age. And though we mourned to lose him whom we had all loved so much, we could not help feeling that it was a happy change for him, as he could hardly see or hear. Next to him, my poor little brother Tom fell ill of the typhus fever, and God took him to heaven in the budding of his childhood. Only a year or two ago, my father gave me his dying blessing and was then a very old man. My mother now survives, though very old, and my two sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, who were then lively girls, are living and are the mothers of families. My brother John, a middle-aged man, is the captain of a ship, being now far away on a voyage, and he has left behind him a wife and 2 boys, the youngest of whom is as old as he was at the time I have spoken of. I am almost an old woman, though on these happy evenings that I was speaking of, I was the youngest but one. You, my little friends, will perhaps some day have to look back upon such changes as I have seen. The thought that they will come upon you need not make you sad, but it should make you good, and cause you to resolve to do your duty and to serve God. If you do so, when you get as old as I am, you will find that if age brings its cares and sorrows, it also brings surer and even brighter hopes of a life beyond the grave. John Davis and his wife were very poor people, but as they worked very hard, they could just get a living for themselves. John worked for a farmer in the parish, and his wife took in needlework. They did pretty well when John had work, but for nearly 2 years John's master could not employ him always, and he was brought almost to distress. But his wife always used to keep up his spirits by saying, "Be content, and thank God if you can but live. Brighter hours will come." Sometimes John was quite spirit-broken, and said he should leave home and try to get work somewhere else. He was forced to sell some of his goods to buy food and did not know which way to turn. But his wife never failed to wear a cheerful face, and used to be always saying to him, "Do your best, and be content to take what God appoints." John loved his wife very much, but he was sometimes half vexed because she was never sad like he was. He would tell her that it was a very good thing to be cheerful and happy when they could get a good living. She then used to say to him that there was no virtue in being content when all was going on well, and that the proper time to try to be cheerful was when things were going amiss. At last, better times came. John got into work on the estate of a rich man who lived near, and as he was a very honest man and knew his work, his master soon put him in a place of trust, raised his wages, and gave him a good house to live in. John had by this time got 5 children, and he could no longer deny that he had reason enough to be a happy man. You may see him and his wife and children in the picture, enjoying a fine summer's evening in front of their house. I knew John when I was young, and he was always ready to say how much was due to his good wife. He told me that he owed all his good fortune to her cheerful spirits and good advice to him, and added that now he was well off, he found the truth of what she had told him, that the proper time to try to be cheerful was when things were going amiss. I have never forgot that lesson, and I hope I never shall. And I beg my young friends to keep in mind that contentment is a constant feast. There is work enough in the world for everyone to do something. There is no proper place for idle people. This is what old Michael the basket maker used to say to his children, and as they grew up, they found reason enough to thank him for the lesson. Michael had been a sailor in his youth, but when he married, he settled in a country place and took up the trade of a basket maker. At first, he could hardly get money enough to buy rods, but by working very hard, he soon got money and credit too. No one in the village was now up before Michael, and most people went to bed before he left off work. Small as was the sum of money that he could earn in a week, he would always put by something, if it was but a penny. Every month he put these savings into the savings bank, and in the course of the first 6 years, he found he had got 25 pounds. By this time he had got 2 children, and the eldest was old enough to learn to read. She used to sit by him with her book as he worked, and he taught her when she wanted help. His wife was in the meantime doing something in the house, or working for some of the farmers who lived near. Michael now bought a cow and 2 pigs and made some profit by them. In 6 years more he bought the cottage he lived in, and 12 years after this, that is 24 years after he was married, he rented a little farm. By this time he had 7 children, and as he had made his cottage larger, they all lived at home and helped him. His eldest boys worked at the farm, and the girls milked the cows and made the butter under the care of their mother and kept the poultry. As for Michael himself, though he was well off, he kept on his old trade and went on in his old habits. The last time I saw him before I left the place in which he lived, he was teaching his youngest child to read while he was at work, just as he had taught his eldest. I have often thought of Michael's words, "There is no place in the world for idle people." There lived in Boston a wise and ancient chemist by the name of Dr. Dawes, who dabbled somewhat in magic. There also lived in Boston a young lady by the name of Claribel Sudds, who was possessed of much money, little wit, and an intense desire to go upon the stage. So Claribel went to Dr. Dawes and said, "I can neither sing nor dance. I cannot recite verse nor play upon the piano. I am no acrobat, nor leper, nor high kicker. Yet I wish to go upon the stage. What shall I do?" "Are you willing to pay for such accomplishments?" asked the wise chemist. "Certainly," answered Claribel, jingling her purse. "Then come to me tomorrow at 2 o'clock," said he. All that night he practiced what is known as chemical sorcery, so that when Claribel Sudds came next day at 2 o'clock, he showed her a small box filled with compounds that closely resembled French bonbons. "This is a progressive age," said the old man, "and I flatter myself your Uncle Dawes keeps right along with the procession. Now, one of your old-fashioned sorcerers would have made you some nasty, bitter pills to swallow, but I have consulted your taste and convenience. Here are some magic bonbons. If you eat this one with the lavender color, you can dance thereafter as lightly and gracefully as if you had been trained a lifetime. After you consume the pink confection, you will sing like a nightingale. Eating the white one will enable you to become the finest elocutionist in the land. The chocolate piece will charm you into playing the piano better than Rubinstein, while after eating the lemon-yellow bonbon you can easily kick 6 feet above your head." "How delightful!" exclaimed Claribel, who was truly enraptured. "You are certainly a most clever sorcerer as well as a considerate compounder." And she held out her hand for the box. "Ahem," said the wise one. "A check, please." "Oh, yes, to be sure. How stupid of me to forget it," she returned. He considerately retained the box in his own hand while she signed a check for a large amount of money, after which he allowed her to hold the box herself. "Are you sure you have made them strong enough?" she inquired anxiously. It usually takes a great deal to affect me." "My only fear," replied Dr. Dawes, "is that I have made them too strong, for this is the first time I have ever been called upon to prepare these wonderful confections." "Don't worry," said Clarabelle. "The stronger they act, the better I shall act myself." She went away after saying this, but stopping in at a dry goods store to shop, she forgot the precious box in her new interest and left it lying on the ribbon counter. Then little Bessie Bostwick came to the counter to buy a hair ribbon and laid her parcels beside the box. When she went away, she gathered up the box with her other bundles and trotted off home with it. Bessie never knew, until after she had hung her coat in the hall closet and counted up her parcels, that she had one too many. Then she opened it and exclaimed, "Why, it's a box of candy. Someone must have mislaid it. But it is too small a matter to worry about. There are only a few pieces." So she dumped the contents of the box into a bonbon dish that stood upon the hall table, and picking out the chocolate piece, she was fond of chocolates, ate it daintily while she examined her purchases. These were not many, for Bessie was only 12 years old and was not yet trusted by her parents to expend much money at the stores. But while she tried on the hair ribbon, she suddenly felt a great desire to play upon the piano, and the desire at last became so overpowering that she went into the parlor and opened the instrument. The little girl had, with infinite pains, contrived to learn 2 pieces, which she usually executed with a jerky movement of her right hand, and a left hand that forgot to keep up, and so made dreadful discords. But under the influence of the chocolate bonbon, she sat down and ran her fingers lightly over the keys, producing such exquisite harmony that she was filled with amazement at her own performance. That was the prelude, however. The next moment she dashed into Beethoven's 7th Sonata and played it magnificently. Her mother, hearing the unusual burst of melody, came downstairs to see what musical guest had arrived. But when she discovered it was her own little daughter who was playing so divinely, she had an attack of palpitation of the heart, to which she was subject, and sat down upon a sofa until it should pass away. Meanwhile, Bessie played one piece after another with untiring energy. She loved music, and now found that all she need do was to sit at the piano and listen and watch her hands twinkle over the keyboard. Twilight deepened in the room, and Bessie's father came home and hung up his hat and overcoat and placed his umbrella in the rack. Then he peeped into the parlor to see who was playing. "Great Caesar!" he exclaimed. But the mother came to him softly with her finger on her lips and whispered, "Don't interrupt her, John. Our child seems to be in a trance. Did you ever hear such superb music?" "Why, she's an infant prodigy," gasped the astounded father. "Beats Blind Tom all hollow. It's wonderful." As they stood listening, the senator arrived, having been invited to dine with them that evening. And before he had taken off his coat, the Yale professor, a man of deep learning and scholarly attainments, joined the party. Bessie played on, and the four elders stood in a huddled but silent and amazed group, listening to the music and waiting for the sound of the dinner gong. Mr. Bostwick, who was hungry, picked up the bonbon dish that lay on the table beside him and ate the pink confection. The professor was watching him, so Mr. Bostwick courteously held the dish toward him. The professor ate the lemon-yellow piece, and the senator reached out his hand and took the lavender piece. He did not eat it, however, for, chancing to remember that it might spoil his dinner, he put it in his vest pocket. Mrs. Bostwick, still intently listening to her precocious daughter without thinking what she did, took the remaining piece, which was the white one, and slowly devoured it. The dish was now empty, and Claribel Sudd's precious bonbons had passed from her possession forever. Suddenly Mr. Bostwick, who was a big man, began to sing in a shrill tremolo soprano voice. It was not the same song Bessie was playing, and the discord was shocking that the professor smiled. The senator put his hands to his ears, and Mrs. Bostwick cried in a horrified voice, "William!" Her husband continued to sing as if endeavoring to emulate the famous Christine Nilsson, and paid no attention whatever to his wife or his guests. Fortunately, the dinner gong now sounded, and Mrs. Bostwick dragged Bessie from the piano and ushered her guests into the dining room. Mr. Bostwick followed, singing "The Last Rose of Summer," as if it had been an encore demanded by 1,000 delighted hearers. The poor woman was in despair at witnessing her husband's undignified actions and wondered what she might do to control him. The professor seemed more grave than usual. The senator's face wore an offended expression, and Bessie kept moving her fingers as if she still wanted to play the piano. Mrs. Bostwick managed to get them all seated, although her husband had broken into another area. And then the maid brought in the soup. When she carried a plate to the professor, he cried in an excited voice, "Hold it higher! Higher! I say!" And springing up, he gave it a sudden kick that sent it nearly to the ceiling, from whence the dish descended to scatter soup over Bessie and the maid, and to smash in pieces upon the crown of the professor's bald head. At this atrocious act the senator rose from his seat with an exclamation of horror and glanced at his hostess. For some time Mrs. Bostwick had been staring straight ahead with a dazed expression, but now, catching the senator's eye, she bowed gracefully and began reciting "The Charge of the Light Brigade" in forceful tones. The senator shuddered. Such disgraceful rioting he had never seen nor heard before in a decent private family. He felt that his reputation was at stake, and, being the only sane person apparently in the room, there was no one to whom he might appeal. The maid had run away to cry hysterically in the kitchen. Mr. Bostwick was singing "Oh, Promise Me." The professor was trying to kick the globes off the chandelier. Mrs. Bostwick had switched her recitation to "The Boy Stood on the Burning Deck," and Bessie had stolen into the parlor and was pounding out the overture from the Flying Dutchman. The senator was not at all sure he would not go crazy himself presently, so he slipped away from the turmoil and, catching up his hat and coat in the hall, hurried from the house. That night he sat up late writing a political speech he was to deliver the next afternoon at Faneuil Hall. But his experiences at the Bostwicks had so unnerved him that he could scarcely collect his thoughts, and often he would pause and shake his head pityingly as he remembered the strange things he had seen in that usually respectable home. The next day he met Mr. Bostwick in the street, but passed him by with a stony glare of oblivion. He felt he really could not afford to know this gentleman in the future. Mr. Bostwick was naturally indignant at the direct snub, yet in his mind lingered a faint memory of some quite unusual occurrences at his dinner party the evening before, and he hardly knew whether he dared resent the senator's treatment or not. The political meeting was the feature of the day, for the senator's eloquence was well known in Boston. So the big hall was crowded with people, and in one of the front rows sat the Bostwick family, with the learned Yale professor beside them. They all looked tired and pale, as if they had passed a rather dissipated evening, and the senator was rendered so nervous by seeing them that he refused to look in their direction a second time. While the mayor was introducing him, the great man sat fidgeting in his chair, and happening to put his thumb and finger into his vest pocket, he found the lavender-colored bonbon he had placed there the evening before. "This may clear my throat," thought the senator, and slipped the bonbon into his mouth. A few minutes afterwards he arose before the vast audience which greeted him with enthusiastic plaudits. "My friends," began the senator in a grave voice, "this is a most impressive and important occasion." Then he paused, balanced himself upon his left foot, and kicked his right leg into the air in the way favored by ballet dancers. There was a hum of amazement and horror from the spectators, but the senator appeared not to notice it. He whirled around upon the tips of his toes, kicked right and left in a graceful manner, and startled a bald-headed man in the front row by casting a languishing glance in his direction. Suddenly, Claribel Sudds, who happened to be present, uttered a scream and sprang to her feet, pointing an accusing finger at the dancing senator. She cried in a loud voice, "That's the man who stole my bonbons! Seize him! Arrest him! Don't let him escape!" But the ushers rushed her out of the hall, thinking she had gone suddenly insane, and the senator's friends seized him firmly and carried him out the stage entrance to the street, where they put him into an open carriage and instructed the driver to take him home. The effect of the magic bonbon was still powerful enough to control the poor senator, who stood upon the rear seat of the carriage and danced energetically all the way home, to the delight of the crowd of small boys who followed the carriage and the grief of the sober-minded citizens who shook their heads sadly and whispered that another good man had gone wrong. It took the senator several months to recover from the shame and humiliation of this escapade, and curiously enough, he never had the slightest idea what had induced him to act in so extraordinary a manner. Perhaps it was fortunate the last bonbon had now been eaten, for they might easily have caused considerably more trouble than they did. Of course, Clarabelle went again to the wise chemist and signed a check for another box of magic bonbons, but she must have taken better care of these, for she is now a famous vaudeville actress. This story should teach us the folly of condemning others for actions that we do not understand, for we never know what may happen to ourselves. It may also serve as a hint to be careful about leaving parcels in public places, and incidentally to let other people's packages severely alone. The capture of Father Time. Jim was the son of a cowboy and lived on the broad plains of Arizona. His father had trained him to lasso a bronco or a young bull with perfect accuracy, and had Jim possessed the strength to back up his skill, he would have been as good a cowboy as any in all Arizona. When he was 12 years old, he made his first visit to the East, where Uncle Charles, his father's brother, lived. Of course, Jim took his lasso with him, for he was proud of his skill in casting it, and wanted to show his cousins what a cowboy could do. At first, the city boys and girls were much interested in watching Jim lasso posts and fence pickets, but they soon tired of it, and even Jim decided it was not the right sort of sport for cities. But one day the butcher asked Jim to ride one of his horses into the country, to a pasture that had been engaged, and Jim eagerly consented. He had been longing for a horseback ride, and to make it seem like old times he took his lasso with him. He rode through the streets demurely enough, but on reaching the open country roads, his spirits broke forth into wild jubilation, and urging the butcher's horse to full gallop, he dashed away in true cowboy fashion. Then he wanted still more liberty, and letting down the bars that led into a big field, he began riding over the meadow and throwing his lasso at imaginary cattle, while he yelled and whooped to his heart's content. Suddenly, on making a long cast with his lasso, the loop caught upon something and rested about 3 feet from the ground, while the rope drew taut and nearly pulled Jim from his horse. This was unexpected. More than that, it was wonderful, for the field seemed bare of even a stump. Jim's eyes grew big with amazement, but he knew he had caught something when a voice cried out, "Here, let go! Let go, I say! Can't you see what you've done?" No, Jim couldn't see, nor did he intend to let go until he found out what was holding the loop of the lasso. So he resorted to an old trick his father had taught him, and putting the butcher's horse to a run, began riding in a circle around the spot where his lasso had caught. As he thus drew nearer and nearer his quarry, he saw the rope coil up, yet it looked to be coiling over nothing but air. One end of the lasso was made fast to a ring in the saddle, and when the rope was almost wound up and the horse began to pull away and snort with fear, Jim dismounted. Holding the reins of the bridle in one hand, he followed the rope, and an instant later saw an old man caught fast in the coils of the lasso. His head was bald and uncovered, but long white whiskers grew down to his waist. About his body was thrown a loose robe of fine white linen. In one hand he bore a great scythe, and beneath the other arm he carried an hourglass. While Jim gazed wonderingly upon him, this venerable old man spoke in an angry voice. "Now then, get that rope off as fast as you can. You've brought everything on earth to a standstill by your foolishness. Well, what are you staring at? Don't you know who I am?" "No," said Jim stupidly. "Well, I'm Time, Father Time. Now make haste and set me free, if you want the world to run properly." "How did I happen to catch you?" asked Jim, without making a move to release his captive. "I don't know. I've never been caught before," growled Father Time. "But I suppose it was because you were foolishly throwing your lasso at nothing." "I didn't see you," said Jim. "Of course you didn't. I'm invisible to the eyes of human beings unless they get within 3 feet of me, and I take care to keep more than that distance away from them. That's why I was crossing this field, where I supposed no one would be, and I should have been perfectly safe had it not been for your beastly lasso. Now then," he added crossly, "are you going to get that rope off?" "Why should I?" asked Jim. "Because everything in the world stopped moving the moment you caught me. I don't suppose you want to make an end of all business and pleasure and war and love and misery and ambition and everything else, do you? Not a watch has ticked since you tied me up here like a mummy." Jim laughed. It really was funny to see the old man wound round and round with coils of rope from his knees up to his chin. "It'll do you good to rest," said the boy. "From all I've heard, you lead a rather busy life." "Indeed I do," replied Father Time with a sigh. "I'm due in Kamchatka this very minute, and to think one small boy is upsetting all my regular habits." "Too bad," said Jim with a grin. "But since the world has stopped anyhow, it won't matter if it takes a little longer recess. As soon as I let you go, time will fly again. Where are your wings?" "I haven't any," answered the old man. "That is a story cooked up by someone who never saw me. As a matter of fact, I move rather slowly." "I see you take your time," remarked the boy. "What do you use that scythe for?" "To mow down the people," said the ancient one. "Every time I swing my scythe, someone dies." "Then I ought to win a life-saving medal by keeping you tied up," said Jim. "Some folks will live this much longer." "But they won't know it," said Father Time with a sad smile. "So it will do them no good. You may as well untie me at once." "No," said Jim with a determined air. "I may never capture you again, so I'll hold you for a while and see how the world wags without you." Then he swung the old man, bound as he was, upon the back of the butcher's horse, and getting into the saddle himself, started back toward town, one hand holding his prisoner and the other guiding the reins. When he reached the road, his eye fell on a strange tableau. A horse and buggy stood in the middle of the road, the horse in the act of trotting, with his head held high and two legs in the air, but perfectly motionless. In the buggy a man and a woman were seated, but had they been turned into stone they could not have been more still and stiff. "There's no time for them," sighed the old man. "Won't you let me go now?" "Not yet," replied the boy. He rode on until he reached the city, where all the people stood in exactly the same positions they were in when Jim lassoed Father Time. Stopping in front of a big dry goods store, the boy hitched his horse and went in. The clerks were measuring out goods and showing patterns to the rows of customers in front of them. But everyone seemed suddenly to have become a statue. There was something very unpleasant in this scene, and a cold shiver began to run up and down Jim's back, so he hurried out again. On the edge of the sidewalk sat a poor, crippled beggar holding out his hat, and beside him stood a prosperous-looking gentleman who was about to drop a penny into the beggar's hat. Jim knew this gentleman to be very rich, but rather stingy. So he ventured to run his hand into the man's pocket and take out his purse, in which was a $20 gold piece. This glittering coin he put in the gentleman's fingers instead of the penny, and then restored the purse to the rich man's pocket. "That donation will surprise him when he comes to life," thought the boy. He mounted the horse again and rode up the street. As he passed the shop of his friend, the butcher, he noticed several pieces of meat hanging outside. "I'm afraid that meat'll spoil," he remarked. "It takes time to spoil meat," answered the old man. This struck Jim as being queer, but true. "It seems time meddles with everything," said he. "Yes, you've made a prisoner of the most important personage in the world," groaned the old man, "and you haven't enough sense to let him go again." Jim did not reply, and soon they came to his uncle's house, where he again dismounted. The street was filled with teams and people, but all were motionless. His two little cousins were just coming out the gate on their way to school, with their books and slates underneath their arms. So Jim had to jump over the fence to avoid knocking them down. In the front room sat his aunt, reading her Bible. She was just turning a page when time stopped. In the dining room was his uncle, finishing his luncheon. His mouth was open and his fork poised just before it, while his eyes were fixed upon the newspaper folded beside him. Jim helped himself to his uncle's pie, and while he ate it, he walked out to his prisoner. "There's one thing I don't understand," said he. "What's that?" asked Father Time. "Why is it that I'm able to move around while everyone else is froze up?" "That is because I'm your prisoner," answered the other. "You can do anything you wish with time now." but unless you are careful, you'll do something you will be sorry for." Jim threw the crust of his pie at a bird that was suspended in the air, where it had been flying when time stopped. "Anyway," he laughed, "I'm living longer than anyone else. No one will ever be able to catch up with me again. Each life has its allotted span," said the old man. "When you have lived your proper time, my scythe will mow you down." "I forgot your scythe," said Jim thoughtfully. Then a spirit of mischief came into the boy's head, for he happened to think that the present opportunity to have fun would never occur again. He tied Father Time to his uncle's hitching post, that he might not escape, and then crossed the road to the corner grocery. The grocer had scolded Jim that very morning for stepping into a basket of turnips by accident. So the boy went to the back end of the grocery and turned on the faucet of the molasses barrel. "That'll make a nice mess when Time starts the molasses running all over the floor," said Jim with a laugh. A little further down the street was a barber shop, and sitting in the barber's chair, Jim saw the man that all the boys declared was the meanest man in town. He certainly did not like the boys, and the boys knew it. The barber was in the act of shampooing this person when Time was captured. Jim ran to the drugstore, and getting a bottle of mucilage, he returned and poured it over the ruffled hair of the unpopular citizen. "That'll probably surprise him when he wakes up," thought Jim. Nearby was the schoolhouse. Jim entered it and found that only a few of the pupils were assembled, but the teacher sat at his desk, stern and frowning as usual. Taking a piece of chalk, Jim marked upon the blackboard in big letters the following words: "Every scholar is requested to yell the minute he enters the room. He will also please throw his books at the teacher's head. Signed, Prof. Sharp." "That ought to raise a nice rumpus," murmured the mischief maker as he walked away. On the corner stood Policeman Mulligan, talking with old Miss Scrapple, the worst gossip in town, who always delighted in saying something disagreeable about her neighbors. Jim thought this opportunity was too good to lose. So he took off the policeman's cap and brass-buttoned coat and put them on Miss Scrapple, while the lady's feathered and ribboned hat he placed jauntily upon the policeman's head. The effect was so comical that the boy laughed aloud, and as a good many people were standing near the corner, Jim decided that Miss Scrapple and Officer Mulligan would create a sensation when Time started upon his travels. Then the young cowboy remembered his prisoner, and, walking back to the hitching post, he came within 3 feet of it and saw Father Time still standing patiently within the toils of the lasso. He looked angry and annoyed, however, and growled out, "Well, when do you intend to release me?" "I've been thinking about that ugly scythe of yours," said Jim. "What about it?" asked Father Time. "Perhaps if I let you go you'll swing it at me the first thing to be revenged," replied the boy. Father Time gave him a severe look, but said, "I've known boys for thousands of years, and of course I know they're mischievous and reckless. But I like boys, because they grow up to be men and people my world. Now if a man had caught me by accident, as you did, I could have scared him into letting me go instantly. But boys are harder to scare. I don't know as I blame you. I was a boy myself, long ago when the world was new. But surely you've had enough fun with me by this time, and now I hope you'll show the respect that is due to old age. Let me go, and in return I will promise to forget all about my capture. The incident won't do much harm anyway, for no one will ever know that time has halted the last 3 hours or so. All right, said Jim cheerfully. Since you've promised not to mow me down, I'll let you go. But he had a notion some people in the town would suspect time had stopped when they returned to life. He carefully unwound the rope from the old man, who, when he was free, at once shouldered his scythe, rearranged his white robe, and nodded farewell. The next moment he had disappeared, and with a rustle and rumble and roar of activity the world came to life again, and jogged along as it always had before. Jim wound up his lasso, mounted the butcher's horse, and rode slowly down the street. Loud screams came from the corner, where a great crowd of people quickly assembled. From his seat on the horse, Jim saw Miss Scrapple, attired in the policeman's uniform, angrily shaking her fists in Mulligan's face, while the officer was furiously stamping upon the lady's hat, which he had torn from his own head amidst the jeers of the crowd. As he rode past the schoolhouse, he heard a tremendous chorus of yells, and knew Profernball Sharp was having a hard time to quell the riot caused by the sign on the blackboard. Through the window of the barber shop he saw the mean man frantically belaboring the barber with a hairbrush, while his hair stood up stiff as bayonets in all directions, and the grocer ran out of his door and yelled, "Fire!" while his shoes left a track of molasses wherever he stepped. Jim's heart was filled with joy. He was fairly reveling in the excitement he had caused when someone caught his leg and pulled him from the horse. "What are you doing here, you rascal?" cried the butcher angrily. "Didn't you promise to put that beast inter Plimpton's pasture? And now I find you riding the poor nag around like a gentleman of leisure." "That's a fact," said Jim with surprise. "I clean forgot about the horse." This story should teach us the supreme importance of time and the folly of trying to stop it. For should you succeed as Jim did in bringing time to a standstill, the world would soon become a dreary place and life decidedly unpleasant. Mama had gone downtown to shop. She had asked Nora to look after Jane Gladys, and Nora promised she would. But it was her afternoon for polishing the silver, so she stayed in the pantry and left Jane Gladys to amuse herself alone in the big sitting room upstairs. The little girl did not mind being alone, for she was working on her first piece of embroidery, a sofa pillow for Papa's birthday present. So she crept into the big bay window and curled herself up on the broad sill while she bent her brown head over her work. Soon the door opened and closed again, quietly. Jane Gladys thought it was Nora, so she didn't look up until she had taken a couple more stitches on a forget-me-not. Then she raised her eyes and was astonished to find a strange man in the middle of the room who regarded her earnestly. He was short and fat and seemed to be breathing heavily from his climb up the stairs. He held a work silk hat in one hand, and underneath his other elbow was tucked a good-sized book. He was dressed in a black suit that looked old and rather shabby, and his head was bald upon the top. "Excuse me," he said, while the child gazed at him in solemn surprise. "Are you Jane Gladys Brown?" "Yes, sir," she answered. Very good indeed," he remarked with a queer sort of smile. "I've had quite a hunt to find you, but I've succeeded at last." "How did you get in?" inquired Jane Gladys with a growing distrust of her visitor. "That is a secret," he said mysteriously. This was enough to put the girl on her guard. She looked at the man, and the man looked at her, and both looks were grave and somewhat anxious. "What do you want?" she asked, straightening herself up with a dignified air. "Ah, now we are coming to business," said the man briskly. "I'm going to be quite frank with you. To begin with, your father has abused me in a most ungentlemanly manner." Jane Gladys got off the window-sill and pointed her small finger at the door. "Leave this room immediately," she cried, her voice trembling with indignation. "My papa is the best man in the world. He never bust anybody." "Allow me to explain, please," said the visitor, without paying any attention to her request to go away. "Your father may be very kind to you, for you are his little girl, you know. But when he's downtown in his office, he's inclined to be rather severe, especially on book agents. Now I called on him the other day and asked him to buy the complete works of Peter Smith. And what do you suppose he did?" She said nothing. "Why?" continued the man with growing excitement. "He ordered me from his office and had me put out of the building by the janitor. What do you think of such treatment as that from the best papa in the world, eh?" "I think he was quite right," said Jane Gladys. "Oh, you do? Well," said the man, "I resolved to be revenged for the insult. So, as your father is big and strong and a dangerous man, I have decided to be revenged upon his little girl." Jane Gladys shivered. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to present you with this book," he answered, taking it from under his arm. Then he sat down on the edge of a chair, placed his hat on the rug, and drew a fountain pen from his vest pocket. "I'll write your name in it," said he. "How do you spell Gladys?" "Gladys," she replied. "Thank you. Now this," he continued, rising and handing her the book with a bow, "is my revenge for your father's treatment of me. Perhaps he'll be sorry he didn't buy the complete works of Peter Smith. Goodbye, my dear." He walked to the door, gave her another bow, and left the room. And Jane Gladys could see that he was laughing to himself as if very much amused. When the door had closed behind the queer little man, the child sat down in the window again and glanced at the book. It had a red and yellow cover, and the word "Thingamajigs" was across the front in big letters. Then she opened it, curiously, and saw her name written in black letters upon the first white leaf. He was a funny little man, she said to herself thoughtfully. She turned the next leaf and saw a big picture of a clown, dressed in green and red and yellow, and having a very white face with 3-cornered spots of red on each cheek and over the eyes. While she looked at this, the book trembled in her hands. The leaf crackled and creaked, and suddenly the clown jumped out of it and stood upon the floor beside her, becoming instantly as big as any ordinary clown. After stretching his arms and legs and yawning in a rather impolite manner, he gave a silly chuckle and said, "This is better. You don't know how cramped one gets standing so long upon a page of flat paper." Perhaps you can imagine how startled Jane Gladys was, and how she stared at the clown who had just leaped out of the book. "You didn't expect anything of this sort, did you?" he asked, leering at her in clown fashion. Then he turned around to take a look at the room, and Jane Gladys laughed in spite of her astonishment. "What amuses you?" demanded the clown. "Why, the back of you is all white," cried the girl. "You're only a clown in front of you." "Quite likely," he returned in an annoyed tone. "The artist made a front view of me. He wasn't expected to make the back of me, for that was against the page of the book." "But it makes you look so funny," said Jane Gladys, laughing until her eyes were moist with tears. The clown looked sulky and sat down upon a chair so she couldn't see his back. "I'm not the only thing in the book," he remarked crossly. This reminded her to turn another page, and she had scarcely noted that it contained the picture of a monkey when the animal sprang from the book with a great crumpling of paper and landed upon the window seat beside her. "Hee hee 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 hee," chattered the creature, springing to the girl's shoulder and then to the center table. "This is great fun. Now I can be a real monkey instead of a picture of one." "Real monkeys can't talk," said Jane Gladys reprovingly. "How do you know? Have you ever been one yourself?" inquired the animal. And then he laughed loudly, and the clown laughed too, as if he enjoyed the remark. The girl was quite bewildered by this time. She thoughtlessly turned another leaf, and before she had time to look twice, a gray donkey leaped from the book and stumbled from the window seat to the floor with a great clatter. "You're clumsy enough, I'm sure," said the child indignantly, for the beast had nearly upset her. "Clumsy? And why not?" demanded the donkey with angry voice. "If the fool artist had drawn you out of perspective as he did me, I guess you'd be clumsy yourself." "What's wrong with you?" asked Jane Gladys. My front and rear legs on the left side are nearly 6 inches too short. That's what's the matter. If that artist didn't know how to draw properly, why did he try to make a donkey at all? I don't know, replied the child, seeing an answer was expected. I can hardly stand up, grumbled the donkey, and the least little thing will topple me over. Don't mind that, said the monkey, making a spring at the chandelier and swinging from it by his tail until Jane Gladys feared he would knock all the globes off. The same artist has made my ears as big as that clown's, and everyone knows a monkey hasn't any ears to speak of, much less to draw. He should be prosecuted, remarked the clown gloomily. I haven't any back. Jane Gladys looked from one to the other with a puzzled expression upon her sweet face, and turned another page of the book. Swift as a flash there sprang over her shoulder a tawny, spotted leopard, which landed upon the back of a big leather armchair and turned upon the others with a fierce movement. The monkey climbed to the top of the chandelier and chattered with fright. The donkey tried to run and straightway tipped over on his left side. The clown grew paler than ever, but he sat still in his chair and gave a low whistle of surprise. The leopard crouched upon the back of the chair, lashed his tail from side to side, and glared at all of them by turns, including Jane Gladys. "Which of us are you going to attack first?" asked the donkey, trying hard to get upon his feet again. "I can't attack any of you," snarled the leopard. "The artist made my mouth shut so I haven't any teeth, and he forgot to make my claws. But I'm a frightful-looking creature nevertheless, am I not?" "Oh, yes," said the clown indifferently. "I suppose you're frightful-looking enough. But if you have no teeth nor claws, we don't mind your looks at all." This so annoyed the leopard that he growled horribly, and the monkey laughed at him. Just then the book slipped from the girl's lap, and as she made a movement to catch it, one of the pages near the back opened wide. She caught a glimpse of a fierce grizzly bear looking at her from the page, and quickly threw the book from her. It fell with a crash in the middle of the room, but beside it stood the great grizzly, who had wrenched himself from the page before the book closed. "Now," cried the leopard from his perch, "you'd better look out for yourselves. You can't laugh at him as you did at me. The bear has both claws and teeth." "Indeed I have," said the bear in a low, deep, growling voice. "And I know how to use them too. If you read in that book, you'll find I'm described as a horrible, cruel, and remorseless grizzly, whose only business in life is to eat up little girls, shoes, dresses, ribbons, and all." And then the author says, "I smack my lips and glory in my wickedness." "That's awful," said the donkey, sitting upon his haunches and shaking his head sadly. "What do you suppose possessed the author to make you so hungry for girls? Do you eat animals also?" "The author does not mention my eating anything but little girls," replied the bear. "Very good," remarked the clown, drawing a long breath of relief. You may begin eating Jane Gladys as soon as you wish. She laughed because I had no back. And she laughed because my legs are out of perspective, brayed the donkey. But you also deserve to be eaten, screamed the leopard from the back of the leather chair. For you laughed and poked fun at me because I had no claws nor teeth. Don't you suppose, Mr. Grizzly, you could manage to eat a clown, a donkey, and a monkey after you finish the girl? Perhaps so, and a leopard into the bargain, growled the bear. It will depend on how hungry I am, but I must begin on the little girl first because the author says I prefer girls to anything. Jane Gladys was much frightened on hearing this conversation, and she began to realize what the man meant when he said he gave her the book to be revenged. Surely Papa would be sorry he hadn't bought the complete works of Peter Smith when he came home and found his little girl eaten up by a grizzly bear. Shoes, dress, ribbons, and all. The bear stood up and balanced himself on his rear legs. This is the way I look in the book, he said. Now watch me eat the little girl. He advanced slowly toward Jane Gladys, and the monkey, the leopard, the donkey, and the clown all stood around in a circle and watched the bear with much interest. But before the grizzly reached her, the child had a sudden thought and cried out, "Stop! You mustn't eat me. It would be wrong." "Why?" asked the bear in surprise. "Because I own you. You're my private property," she answered. "I don't see how you make that out," said the bear in a disappointed tone. "Why, the book was given to me. My name's on the front leaf, and you belong by rights in the book, so you mustn't dare to eat your owner." The grizzly hesitated. "Can any of you read?" he asked. "I can," said the clown. "Then see if she speaks the truth. Is her name really in the book?" The clown picked it up and looked at the name. "It is," said he. "Jane Gladys Brown," and written quite plainly in big letters. The bear sighed. "Then of course I can't eat her," he decided. "That author is as disappointing as most authors are. But he's not as bad as the artist," exclaimed the donkey, who was still trying to stand up straight. "The fault lies with yourselves," said Jane Gladys severely. "Why didn't you stay in the book where you were put?" The animals looked at each other in a foolish way, and the clown blushed under his white paint. "Really?" began the bear, and then he stopped short. The doorbell rang loudly. "It's Mama!" cried Jane Gladys, springing to her feet. "She's come home at last. Now, you stupid creatures." But she was interrupted by them all making a rush for the book. There was a swish and a whir and a rustling of leaves, and an instant later the book lay upon the floor, looking just like any other book, while Jane Gladys's strange companions had all disappeared. This story should teach us to think quickly and clearly upon all occasions. For had Jane Gladys not remembered that she owned the bear, he probably would have eaten her before the bell rang. And now as we come to the end of this session, if you're still awake, I would like you to feel the calm you've created within yourself. You've given your mind and body such a beautiful gift, a moment to simply be. Let that sense of peace stay with you as you move through the rest of your night. If you'd like, you can stay here a little longer.